The best I've seen was 11 leeches on a knob end. He didn't wear underpants. They went for the first bit of skin they got when they went through the flywheel buttons. And they had a field dressing wrapped around the delicate end with the tapes up round his neck, and it's the first time I've seen one of those things in a sling.
Though the SAS were learning about the jungle the hard way, they were not achieving results. They couldn't find the communists, let alone kill them.
What were the maps that you had like?
At the start, they were rubbish. They were air photographed maps, so they were taken from 20,000, 30,000 feet, and sometimes there was a cloud. So on your map, you had a big white patch with the word cloud wrote on it, and that could cover 50 map squares.
The injuries sustained in tree jumping made it impractical. If walking was the answer, then the SAS would have to become better at tracking their prey. And their teachers in this jungle art were a fearsome tribe of headhunters from Borneo, hired by the British Army. Mani Kalau was one of them.
This is the skull of one of my enemies. I saw him with a Bren gun. He turned, and I just shot him. Since I've killed him and chopped his head off, he belongs to me.
Some trackers were brilliant, and they knew what they were talking about. I mean, my tracking is rubbish compared with theirs.
45 years on, Lofty Large is back in the jungle where he tracked the communists down.
If you look at this, I can see where somebody's walked around. Leaves which are like that, the wet side of it up, you know it hasn't been that way long. Look at the difference. So they've been turned over. Somebody has walked through there. Every sense is switched on to maximum. You're listening, smelling, looking, everything, feeling that you get a feel for jungle. And you sense danger.
In this uncharted territory, communists could be 10 miles in front, or 10 feet behind, and still remain hidden. The slightest noise could cost you your life. In 1963, America went to war in Vietnam. In the same year, 15,000 British soldiers arrived in Borneo to take part in another conflict that could have been Britain's Vietnam, but in fact had a very different outcome. This was due to the attitude of the government, and in particular, the Defence Secretary, Dennis Healy.
It was the most successful war Britain has ever waged. We won it after 4 years with a loss of only 134 men. Whereas the Americans tried to win the Vietnamese War by bombing, and millions were killed, and they lost.
The British arrived in Borneo to protect their former dependency from its aggressive neighbour, Indonesia. Sukarno, the Indonesian premier, wanted the island of Kalimantan to himself. He had already incited a revolt in neighbouring Brunei, and now his special forces were burning border villages. While some patrols stayed close to the longhouses, others lived in the jungle itself. For 14 days they never spoke, washed or smoked. The tension was only relieved when night fell, when they would stop moving, knowing that the Indonesians were doing the same thing. The highlight of each day was deciding what to eat.
I don't want to leave this in case it falls over.
Well, don't let it fall over.
You get a different meal every night with the same thing,
Yeah.
because you just varied the amount you put in.
There you are.
That's good.
I had lots of practice, Peter.
How many days would you eat it for?
14,
14, yeah.
and then you'd go
Start
out,
again.
and then you'd go out for 2 or 3 days and go back in with another lot and eat that again for
Yeah.
14 days, the same stuff.
Yeah.
We were on the same things for 4 months, even if we didn't like it. And those who didn't like it got so they had to.
Curried bully beef or curried sardines, or both curried together.
On the thing.
And as a last resort, the local delicacy, ikan bilis.
Pour a bit more. That's
Ikan
it.
bilis.
That's it, ikan bilis.
Dried
Right.
fish.
If you're into rotten fish, it's
If you're
great.
into rotten fish and
Yeah.
you can hold your nose and eat at the same time, it's great.
Nothing wrong with it at all. It's lovely.
I'd only eat that if I was really desperate.
It stinks.
Of course it stinks, that's the idea of it. I was the original pig in shit. Everybody enjoyed it. The scorpions had somewhere to crawl under warm. The leeches were right next to your ear. It was good.
Despite the presence of the SAS, the Borneo confrontation was fast approaching boiling point. Indonesian special forces began attacking police stations and villages 30 miles inland from the border, knowing the British would not respond in kind. But this was about to change. Determined to show that the British Army were not toothless, Dennis Healy sanctioned secret cross-border raids into Indonesia. They were called Claret operations. The Claret operations were so secret, not even the SAS patrols knew where their other patrols were going.
We'd all be called up to the opsman. On the wall there would be a map of our divisional area. Curtains would be, thick blue curtains would be closed. The curtain would be open to where you are, not the rest. I kept trying to take a peek at the others. And it would only show you where your area was and where your patrol's going. You'd drop off at a helipad and you knew that you were your friendly side of the border. You knew you were down maybe 300 or 400 yards before you went across the border, but it was very difficult until you could get down and really study your map.
Once over the border, the SAS would never follow tracks. They knew what surprises might be left in store for them.
These traps could be set anywhere. Make a hole as easily as that. The bullet is put in with the bullet facing upwards and the cartridge at the bottom end onto a pin. When the weight of a man goes on the top, the bullet is pressed down on the pin and explodes and sends the shot up through your leg. Cover it and you stand on it and it explodes at that point. They were a very ingenious invention of the Vietnam War.
As it turned out, these traps would prove the least of their worries. Though the British government had authorized secret cross-border raids into Indonesia, they did not want to be drawn into a war. The SAS would operate as pathfinders, finding targets for larger forces. The Indonesians knew the SAS patrols were only 4 men strong. If captured over the border, they could expect little mercy. So once again, it was the IBAN trackers who helped them find the way. This was their own backyard, and they had a few old scores to settle.
Jalan Kabu.
Selamat hari.
I went out on patrol and shot this Indonesian guy who was hiding in a tree. I went forward, drew my parang, and brought it down on his head. But the British officer put his arm out and stopped me. The blade went straight into the guy's face. I said, Why did you do that? I've just killed him. He belongs to me.
Oh, yeah. The SAS cut heads off as well. I was on patrol down towards Lundu with the SAS, and 3 of them cut the heads off Indonesians. They brought them back because they wanted to make the skulls into lampshades. You know, they put light bulbs in their eye sockets.
As the number of Claret operations increased, the targets became more important.
I was sent in to look for the enemy special forces base. Nearly every time I went in, it was to find the special forces base, and they gave me an area of jungle a few miles square and said, they're in there somewhere, go and find them. The trick is to do it and hope to Christ you get away with it.
The enemy special forces base was on the Kumba River, a waterway hidden in the deep jungle that the Indonesians used as a major supply route. Its commander, Colonel Muadani, was an important target for the SAS, but so far no one had been able to find the river or his base because 4 miles of impenetrable swamp protected it from the border. "40 years later, Pete and Lofty have avoided the swamp and taken the sensible route to the Kumba River, by boat. The jungle around it has been cut down, but the distinctive bend in the river that Lofty was looking for is instantly recognizable.
This is more like it. Go right over. That bank looks right. That's it falling.
This is
a good log.
Yeah, actual spot done.
Actual spot. We reached it in probably the best possible place along 100 miles of river. We knew there was an Indonesian army base between 500 and 1,000 yards west of us. And they had cut-off tracks through the jungle north of us. So when we went out, they were going to be in a good position to get in our way.
Finding the Kumba River was only part of the plan. The 4 men, hiding in a shallow ditch 4 miles inside Indonesia, had to let their enemy know they were there. To take a target of opportunity, right next to an Indonesian army base, would strike a serious psychological blow. Lofty was waiting for something big, but nothing seemed quite big enough.
He decides he's going to have a Chinese parliament, so he said to me, Pete, what do you think then? I said, I think we've got it the next one, Loft, don't you, and get out of here. And we're never going to get it before it gets dark. So we heard this other boat coming up. And all of a sudden he just said, stop, stop, stop. So clicked the safety catches back on. And he said, hang on, he said, there's a woman on there.
There could have been other women and there could have been children on the boat. And we don't do that sort of target. So it went. And it was, in fact, the very man we'd been looking for 3 months. Colonel Mordani of the Indonesian Paracommando unit. I mean, he was on the end of my rifle and I let him go. But you can't blat women and kids.
Lofty did not have to wait long for another target. 10 minutes later, another barge lurched towards him.
It came up here.
Yeah.
And then we hit it there. The one facing me saw me. He was in shock, but not for long. and then the one with his back to us who hadn't moved. He was still sat with his back to me when I blotted him.
Without waiting to see what would happen next, the patrol tore back through the jungle before the Indonesians could cut them off. A month later, a company of Gurkhas followed Lofty's route through the swamps and destroyed Colonel Murdani's Special Forces base. It was a major victory for the British. After 2 years of these claret raids, the Indonesians were demoralized. 2,000 of them had lost their lives, at a cost of only 134 British soldiers. 3 of them were from the SAS.
Malaysia News.